Welcome back to another deep dive, custom tailored just for you. Today we're looking at a medical paradox, really, something that completely turns our understanding of human progress totally on its head.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It really is a fascinating topic.
I mean, what if the very successes of modern medicine, the things we literally throw parades for, like surviving a major heart attack, what if those are quietly setting the stage for the fastest growing neurodegenerative condition in the world?
It is a beautifully cruel irony. We uh we celebrate saving a heart in someone's 50s, but we rarely hit pause to ask what happens to that exact same person's brain 20 or 30 years down the line.
Right.
We extended the runway of human life, but we didn't necessarily prepare the healthcare system for the actual landing.
And our mission for today's deep dive is to figure out exactly what that landing looks like, specifically regarding the explosive worldwide growth of Parkinson disease. To do that, we are drawing from a fascinating, newly published paper. It just dropped on March 4th, 2026, authored by researchers Lizanne J. Dommerswijsen, Sirwan K.L. Darwish, and Bastian R. Bloem out of the Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands.
Their timing really couldn't be better. Parkinson's isn't just growing. I mean, it is currently outpacing every other neurodegenerative condition on the planet.
Wow, every other one.
Every single one. And what these researchers have done is take a massive mountain of incredibly dense epidemiological data, demographic shifts, environmental toxins, diagnostic variables.
We're really heavy stuff.
Right. And they mapped it all into a single intuitive framework that just instantly makes sense of the crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we get to their framework, we have to lay out the staggering numbers the authors present. The global number of people living with Parkinson's disease jumped from 2.5 million in 1990
Oh.
to 11.8 million in 2021. That is almost a five-fold increase in just 30 years.
It's massive.
And by 2050, the paper projects it is going to hit an unbelievable 25.2 million.
What's fascinating here is that we aren't just talking about abstract ratios or relative risk percentages. We are talking about absolute numbers.
Which changes everything.
It really does. In public health, it is so easy to hide behind a percentage point. But the absolute number is what actually breaks a hospital system. Every single one of those projected 25.2 million cases is a real person who needs
Real person. Yeah.
who needs a movement disorder specialist, specialized physical therapy, caregiver support, and highly complex medication regimens.
So it's less of a math problem and more of a terrifying logistics nightmare.
That is the perfect way to phrase it, is the absolute number that dictates whether there is a hospital bed available for you or your family member,
Right.
or whether there are even enough specialized neurologists in your state to get an appointment.
Which perfectly sets up the central metaphor of this paper. The authors call it the epidemiological bathtub.
I love this metaphor.
It's a deceptively simple image, but it does so much heavy lifting for understanding how we are accelerating toward that 25 million mark. Let's build this visual for the listener.
Right to it.
So in this model, the water level inside the tub represents the total number of people currently living with clinically manifest Parkinson disease. So in medical terms, the prevalence.
Yes. And the bathtub itself, the actual physical porcelain, the walls of the tub, that represents the total hard-capped capacity of our global healthcare system.
Okay.
That means the clinics, the nursing staff, the supply chains for medication, the community support orders, everything.
So looking at that 2050 projection of 25.2 million, we are essentially staring down an impending overflow.
A massive overflow.
Because the water level is rising at a violently accelerated rate, and the physical walls of our healthcare bathtub aren't stretching to accommodate it.
They physically cannot stretch fast enough. You can't just magically conjure 100,000 new movement disorder specialists out of thin air.
Right. Training takes, what, a decade?
Decades, sometimes. If the water keeps rising like this, it spills over. The resources are completely exhausted, the quality of care plummets, and the system basically fails the patients.
That is a terrifying visual. A bathtub overflowing because the water just keeps rushing in. So to understand how to stop a flood, you have to know where the water is actually coming from.
Exactly.
And the researchers break the problem down into the water entering the tub and the outflow, which is the water leaving the tub. Let's start with the inflow. Why is this tub filling up so incredibly fast?
Well, the paper points to a few different sources. The first being an entirely new tap that we have essentially installed ourselves.
Yes, this first tap represents a growing reservoir of people at risk. And this is where that cruel medical irony we mentioned earlier comes into full view.
The cardiovascular success story.
Right, the global population is growing, yes, but more significantly, it is aging. Why? Primarily because a few decades ago, the medical field decided to declare all-out war on cardiovascular mortality.
And we won.
We won. We got incredibly good at prescribing statins, performing bypass surgeries, managing blood pressure. We literally stopped millions of people from dying of heart attacks and strokes in their 50s and 60s.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, aging isn't just the literal ticking of a biological clock. From an epidemiological standpoint, age is actually a proxy for your total lifelong exposure to environmental risk factors.
Oh, that's interesting. A proxy.
Yeah. The paper uses a fantastic analogy here. Think about a pack-a-day smoker.
Okay.
Their risk of developing lung cancer skyrockets in their 70s. But it's not merely because their lung cells are old.
It's the compounding effect.
Exactly. It's because they have accumulated 40 years of compounding exposure to carcinogens.
Oh, wow. So for Parkinson's, simply living to be 80 means your brain has had 80 years to absorb whatever environmental triggers or toxins are out there waiting to flip that neurological switch.
That is the biological reality. The longer you survive the things that used to kill us quickly, the more environmental baggage your nervous system collects.
Right.
We built a brilliant medical bridge over cardiovascular disease, and it successfully dropped millions of people right at the doorstep of neurodegeneration.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the obvious next question is whether the actual rate of new individuals developing the disease each year is increasing. Like, are you, as an individual, more likely to get Parkinson's today than someone your exact age was 50 years ago?
Yeah.
Or is it just that there are way more older people around to get it?
That is the massive, contentious debate in epidemiology right now. The technical term for that is incidence, the actual rate of new individuals developing the disease each year.
Okay, incidence.
In our bathtub metaphor, a true increase in incidence would mean we are literally turning the tap handle to let the water flow out faster, rather than just having a bigger reservoir behind the tap.
But the source material notes something that actually surprised me. In places like Western Europe, and specifically in the Netherlands where these authors are based, recent data from 2026 suggests that the incidence rate has actually remained fairly constant. The tap itself isn't necessarily flowing faster in those specific regions.
It is a vital distinction, but we cannot let that regional data lull us into a false sense of security.
Right, because of the base population.
Exactly.
Right.
Even with a perfectly stable incidence rate, if you have a massive demographic boom in the base population of older adults, you still get a huge absolute number of new cases flooding the tub.
Yeah.
However, globally, the authors are adamant that both genetic and environmental factors absolutely have the potential to crank that tap wide open.
And the prime suspect for an actual increase in the rate of new cases worldwide, environmental toxins. The paper specifically flags pesticides, right?
Heavily. They point out that pesticide use has increased exponentially across most regions of the globe over the past 3 to 4 decades.
We industrialized our agriculture.
We did. We saturated the environment with synthetic chemicals to boost crop yields, and now those consequences are manifesting.
It makes complete sense when you think about the historical timeline. We introduced so many novel agricultural chemicals into our soil, our water runoff, and our food supply, starting in the mid-20th century.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s.
Right. So people who were farm workers or living in heavily agricultural zones back then are now hitting their 60s and 70s.
And that loops right back to the lung cancer analogy. If certain agricultural pesticides and industrial solvents are the environmental equivalent of cigarette smoke for the brain,
Which is a crazy thought, but yeah.
and global usage skyrocketed a few decades ago, it is highly probable that in many parts of the world, the tap of new cases is being forced wider. The lifetime exposure is higher, and the population lives long enough for the neurological damage to fully materialize.
So we have an aging population saved by modern cardiology, swimming in a world of accumulated environmental chemicals.
That's the first two factors.
But the authors highlight a third reason the bathtub is filling, and this one really threw me, because it is actually a massive medical triumph disguised as a crisis. They call it repairing a leak.
It is arguably the cleverest part of their framework.
Yeah.
Historically, the plumbing supplying our healthcare bathtub was terrible. It was full of massive leaks.
Meaning missed cases.
Yes. A huge percentage of people who actually developed Parkinson's disease were never formally diagnosed.
They were just misdiagnosed with something like essential tremor.
Or doctors simply wrote off their slowing movements as just getting old.
Just normal aging.
Exactly. They were water escaping the pipes, soaking into the floorboards completely unnoticed by official public health data. They never made it into the official bathtub of recognized prevalence.
But over the last few decades, our diagnostic tools have become incredibly sharp. Neurologists are highly trained to spot subtle early signs. We essentially brought in the plumbers and fixed the leak in the public health data.
Though actual plumbers probably have a much better funding model than global public health surveillance.
Huh. That is unfortunately very true.
Yeah.
But because we fixed that leak, all that water, all those patients who previously would have suffered without a label, is now being routed directly into the tub. It makes the total numbers look like they are spiking wildly, even if the true underlying rate of the disease hasn't changed a bit.
That is the paradox of better medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And it is going to get even more pronounced.
Sure.
The paper notes that we are getting significantly better at recognizing the prodromal stages of Parkinson's.
Prodromal meaning the whisper stage, right?
Yeah.
Before the loud, obvious clinical symptoms like tremors or rigidity even show up.
Yes, we are starting to identify patients based on early physiological indicators.
Oh.
Things like a sudden loss of smell
Oh, wow.
or REM sleep behavior disorders where people act out their dreams. We can track these things now, sometimes years before a classic diagnosis would have been made.
Years before.
Yes, we are catching the water so much earlier in the pipeline.
Which is fantastic for the patient. We want early intervention.
Of course.
But man, from a public health tracking perspective, it just rapidly accelerates the rising water level. We are effectively punishing our own healthcare system's statistics by doing a better job at finding the disease.
It is incredibly frustrating for the statisticians who have to plan hospital capacity, but it is an undeniable win for clinical care. Regardless, it fills the tubs faster.
Okay, so the inflow is aggressive. We've got the aging tap, the pesticide tap, and the newly repaired diagnostic pipes all gushing at once.
A lot of water.
To balance that, you'd hope the water is draining out just as fast.
Yeah.
But it isn't. Let's shift gears and look at the outflow. Why isn't this tub draining?
Well, in our epidemiological bathtub, water really only leaves through one primary mechanism.
Mortality.
Right. When a person with Parkinson's passes away, they exit the prevalence pool. The water level drops.
This raises an important question. If mortality is the drain, what happens when our standard of care improves? Because the paper highlights that survival rates for people with Parkinson's have improved significantly over the last decade. The case fatality rate is actually dropping.
And here we hit the second great medical irony of this paper. Improving survival is a brilliant clinical achievement. We're managing the disease better, preventing secondary complications like severe falls, and treating things like aspiration pneumonia much more effectively.
Right.
But in the context of the bathtub, improving survival is the epidemiological equivalent of shoving a stopper into the drain.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying we're essentially punishing our healthcare system because doctors and nurses are doing their jobs well? That feels incredibly bleak.
It is not meant to be bleak. It is just the stark mathematical reality of chronic disease management.
Mm-hmm.
By giving patients better quality of care, we are keeping them alive longer.
Which is the whole point of medicine.
Exactly. But mathematically, it means individuals are spending more total years living with the disease. The water isn't draining out, so the total volume in the tub just keeps compounding year after year.
It perfectly illustrates the tension between individual patient outcomes and population-level health logistics. What is an undeniable victory for the individual getting an extra 5 or 10 years with their family creates a compounding, massive strain on the macro system.
Yeah, that tension is very real.
The authors also introduce a really interesting concept for managing the water that is currently stuck in the tub. They call it the sponge. It represents disease-modifying interventions.
Yes, this covers secondary and tertiary prevention strategies.
And break those down for me.
Sure. Tertiary prevention is slowing the progression of the disease once clinical symptoms are fully established. Basically, managing it so it doesn't get worse as fast.
Okay, and secondary.
Secondary prevention is intervening even earlier, back in that prodromal whisper stage we talked about, to delay the onset of the severe symptoms entirely.
I'll admit the sponge analogy took me a second to wrap my head around. But if you think about it physically, if you drop a giant sponge into a full bathtub, it absorbs a massive amount of water. It keeps it suspended at the surface, preventing it from rushing down the drain.
It is a highly effective visual. A disease-modifying treatment doesn't cure the patient. It doesn't evaporate the water or remove them from the tub, but it dramatically slows their physical decline. It keeps them in the milder, highly functional stages of the disease for a much longer period.
Which, again, is the ultimate goal short of an outright cure. We want people to have a high quality of life, independence, and mobility for as long as possible.
Absolutely.
But just like the plug in the drain, the sponge keeps the bathtub full. These life-prolonging interventions increase the total number of years a person lives with a disability.
And this is where the logistics of healthcare capacity really bite. The sponge might make the water lighter, in a sense, meaning the patient requires less intensive, round-the-clock, late-stage care for a while.
But they are still there.
They are still very much in the system. They still need regular neurology appointments, constant prescription management, physical therapy. You still have to pay for the infrastructure to support that massive, suspended volume of water.
So we are completely backed into a corner here.
We really are.
The inflow is surging because of aging populations, decades of chemical exposures, and brilliant leak-proof diagnostics. The drain is plugged by much better survival rates, and a sponge is keeping everyone suspended in the tub for years. How do we ever lower the water level?
The paper is brutally honest about this. There is really only one mechanism that can rapidly and definitively lower the water level without relying on mortality. We need a pump.
A pump, meaning a definitive biological cure.
Correct. The researchers are very clear that at present, a cure is a hypothetical intervention.
Right.
But if it existed, a cure would act as an active pump, removing water from the bathtub by completely resolving the disease in patients. It is the only way to directly decrease the absolute number of people living with Parkinson's.
It is wild to think that our entire global healthcare strategy right now is essentially just managing an overflowing tub, desperately waiting for someone in a lab to invent a pump.
That is the reality of neurodegeneration today.
So, what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the entire framework Dahmer Swyson and her team have laid out, the picture is incredibly daunting.
It is.
The tub is filling up from multiple, incredibly powerful sources. We have a massive population that was brilliantly saved from cardiovascular disease, only to face decades of cumulative pesticide and environmental exposure. We've sharpened our diagnostic tools so we don't miss a single drop of water. And simultaneously, we've developed better treatments that have effectively plugged the drain. It is the absolute perfect storm for overwhelming our global healthcare capacity.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment about why this matters, even if you feel entirely disconnected from the world of neurology.
Yeah, why should they care?
Whether you are personally affected by Parkinson's disease, perhaps watching a family member navigate it, or you are just a citizen paying taxes and insurance premiums into a healthcare system, this is your problem too.
It affects everyone.
The absolute numbers are rising sharply. It isn't a statistical illusion or a trick of the light. It is a hard demographic reality.
The walls of the tub are already groaning under the weight.
They are. And for the millions of individuals entering that bathtub over the next few decades, it spells a drastically reduced quality of life if the system cannot support them. For society, it means mounting astronomical costs.
Yeah.
It means a severe deficit of neurological specialists and social care infrastructure. This paper is a siren warning. We have an urgent need to prioritize preventive strategies to turn off the toxic taps, disease-modifying sponges to manage the water we have, and ultimately curative pumps to stop the overflow before it breaks the system entirely.
It is a profound wake-up call, and it leaves you with a final thought to really mull over long after this deep dive ends. This paper reveals that our incredible historic medical success in reducing cardiovascular deaths over the last 50 years has actually created a larger reservoir of people who live long enough to develop an incurable neurodegenerative disease.
It's a huge shift.
It begs a deeply profound question for the future of science. If successfully treating one major killer simply fills the bathtub for a different, currently incurable disease, how do we fundamentally redesign our scientific priorities?
Right.
Because right now, it feels like we aren't ultimately defeating disease. We are just trading one overflowing tub for another.
It was a sobering reality, but grappling with that exact paradox is how we innovate for the next generation of medicine.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.